Good afternoon, folks. Wanted to check in and go over a little bit of an Essay 1 breakdown. Now that you've had time to work on a draft and your outline, things are starting to take shape and we're looking towards the final draft, which is due on Saturday. So I'm just going to share with you a couple things about essay structure and what it looks like in practice based on some past samples. And you can compare these to your own, think about how they line up, think about how they work. So you notice we have the introduction here, right? If you want to review the guidelines on essay structure in the essay structure module, they're there. There's handouts on introductions, thesis statements, and all that good stuff. So here we have a strong introduction. It's thoughtful. It sets up the context. It gives the background information. But what I wanted to ask is to think about the final sentence, because typically we think about the final sentence in the introduction as the thesis statement, right? But if you notice here, we end with a question. Now, is this wrong, quote unquote? We don't have to say it's wrong necessarily, but each choice you make, you want to think about the ramifications and how that sets up the rest of your essay, right? So if you're asking a question, you're not making a statement, right? So we typically think of a thesis as a statement, right? So here the writer's asking a question, which as readers we hope to see answered, but you may want to consider going with a statement, because a statement's something that you can set up and then support and develop throughout your essay, okay? So if we look at the paragraphs, you want to make sure that you have a specific point you're making in that first sentence. So here she does that, right? Michael Scott, otherwise known as the manager in the television series, is best described as a child with power. That's her point. That's her voice coming through, telling us what she thinks about this character. Now we have to read through and consider, does the information in this paragraph support that point? She talks about his lack of social awareness and buffoonery, cringeworthy. That's a quote from an outside source she found. Stanley had a heart attack. So there's a lot of information here, but I'm not quite sure if it actually supports the point she's making, because I don't see any reference or tying it back to the idea of him being a child with power. Okay, so it gets a little off course, and that might be due to the fact that rather than a thesis statement, she's sharing with us a thesis question. So the thesis statement is important not just for our readers, but for us as writers, okay? So we see that when we're writing, we have something to go back to and think about, are my body paragraphs developing the point I'm making in my thesis? And then you go back to the point you're making in that first sentence. And if you follow the pie structure, right, it's point, information, explanation. So she follows that structure well. But the only problem I'm seeing here is that it doesn't quite seem to fit with the point she's making, right? Or there's no explicit explanation of how all this information that she supplies here presents Michael Scott as a child with power, right? So think about that, okay? Then in this sentence, we see rather than a specific point, it's more of a summary of a moment in the show. So then that kind of leads us on to quite a bit of summary, right? And so it gets a little off course again, and we don't quite see the clear analysis that we want to exhibit in our writing. She does bring in ideas from Warner, which is good. This kind of joke. So she eventually gets to a point, right? But it's, as a reader, I'm getting a little off course here. I'm not quite seeing the total focus that can be helpful in a body paragraph, okay? So let's just look at a commercial analysis too real quick. Here we have a very clear focus, right? He sets up this commercial, that it's a Gillette commercial, and then he ends by stating that using their platform to hold men accountable, it's showing men that there needs to be change, and now is the time to do it, okay? So he's coming up with a pretty clear point. So let's see if it follows through. He's not asking a question, right? He's making a statement. so then he has his first paragraph looks at negative issues. Okay, so it seems to follow mostly what he's saying in this thesis statement. But if we think about negative issues, that's something important that he's presenting that does conceivably connect to his thesis, right? The only issue here is that negative issues is very big. It's very broad, but based on his thesis, I know he's really zooming in and zoning in on this issue of masculinity and toxic masculinity, right? That the commercial is trying to address. So I think he needs to tweak it a little bit to show that he is focused specifically on those issues, right? We can't just throw out generalities and it's any issue. It's very specifically focused around toxic masculinity, right? So it goes on and on. I'm going to share these with you as well so you can kind of see what you think in your assessment, right? We have the body paragraphs, we have the conclusion. He has a nice, thoughtful conclusion that kind of echoes what he's already said, but does it in a way that doesn't feel too repetitive, right? The other thing I want to point out that both students work on is MLA format, right? So I want us to really do our best to adhere to MLA format for this essay. We have your name here, my name, the class name, and then the date. Okay, so it goes day, month, year. And this is just a way for us to track formatting and to use a common quote unquote language to know what's going on. The title is nothing fancy, right? It's centered. There's no bold. There's no underlining here. Everything's double spaced. Each paragraph is indented nicely. Nothing's too spaced apart. Nothing's too big. This is 11-point font, so you can do a 12-point font. But I think when I opened it as a Google Doc, it transitioned to 11-point. So I'm not going to worry too much about works cited pages for this essay. We're going to really zone into that on our second essay. But I just want you to think about this and think about your own draft before you submit the final draft. Make sure your thesis is a statement, not a question. Make sure that the points you're making in the body paragraphs develop and support your thesis. And the information that you're providing in the body paragraphs and the explanation you provide all work together to support the point you're making in that body paragraph, okay? And end with a thoughtful conclusion that doesn't just restate what you've already said, right? This is a 3-page paper. The reader's already going to know and recall everything you've just discussed, so you can move into more interesting and compelling focus here where you're taking it out and connecting it to society and culture and do something thoughtful, right? Just end with a thoughtful, compelling point, all right? All right, so keep up the good work. Thank you, and I will talk to you soon.